Welcome to something short and sweet in the Parsha. This week, Parshas Beha'aloscha. God himself comes to you with some criticism. He wants you to correct your ways. Do you listen? You say, of course, I want to do the Ratzon Hashem, the will of God. God himself is telling me what to do. Of course. Not so fast. HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to Miriam and Aaron, tells them, you have sinned against your brother. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very careful how he talks to them. Vayomer shimu na devarai. And Rashi says, no means please. He says to them, please listen to me. And the Sifsei Chachamim explains that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not speak bekas. He didn't speak with anger. Often when we want to administer rebuke, we feel that in order to get the message across, we say it firmly, we say it sternly. No, says the Sifsei Chachamim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that if he would have been stern with Miriam and with Aaron, they would not have listened. Are you kidding me? What else did Miriam and Aaron want to do with their lives besides developing themselves through doing the will of God? And God is talking to them. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to be very careful about how he administers that rebuke. Why? Because the human being is naturally rejects criticism. And when I am criticized, I naturally put up a force field. It's like anti-missile batteries that come to defend myself against, even if it's against God himself administering that rebuke. So did Miriam and Aaron, did they listen? Or at least did they listen right away? One would think so. HaKadosh Baruch Hu must have done a great job. But let's read a few psukim later. HaKadosh Baruch Hu explains clearly their mistake, why their prophecy is different than the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu needed to separate himself from his wife. That was the debate. Moshe Rabbeinu needed to separate himself. They did not. Moshe Rabbeinu had an audience with God anytime God wanted and anytime he wanted. And therefore, he always had to be in a state of purity. He could not be with his wife, and therefore he had to leave his wife. They were like regular Jews. They did not, and they should not, have to separate. HaKadosh Baruch Hu explained it. And all of a sudden, after the explanation, the pasuk says, Vayichar Hashem. Hashem becomes angry. Why does Hashem become angry? Says Sefarno, because they didn't listen. At least they didn't listen immediately. Even after HaKadosh Baruch Hu's kind explanation and the kindest of rebuke, as only HaKadosh Baruch Hu could administer, there was that somewhat of a rejection. Their anti-rebuke missiles came up, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says he needs to show his displeasure. How difficult it is for us when somebody is saying we've done something wrong. Sforno goes on to say that you can contrast their behavior with the behavior of David, who said Chatasi. When he was called on the carpet by Natan HaNavi, his immediate response was, I have sinned. David HaMelech becomes the poster person for accepting rebuke. Said my Rosh Hashiva, remember the story of David HaMelech. Yes, he said Chatasi immediately, but it was only after Natan HaNavi, only after the prophet, spun a story to have David HaMelech admit. Remember the situation. David HaMelech had taken the wife of Uriah Hittite. It was a mistake. The Gemara says, Kol ha'omer David chata eino ela toa, so I'm not going to call it a sin. But it was some sort of a mistake, and Natan HaNavi comes to him, and Natan HaNavi rebukes him. But he just doesn't say you took a man's wife. He tells a whole story about a lone sheep, person who had a single sheep, and he had a next door neighbor who had flocks. And he says, what happened? What would you say about someone who stole the other one's sheep, that lone sheep, and slaughtered it? And David HaMelech becomes irate. And he says that person should be killed. And Nasan HaNavi smiles at him and says, David HaMelech, you're that man. That's when David HaMelech said Chatasi. So even the person who is the semel, who is the model of admission, it was only after great work, a great metaphor, a great picture drawn by Nasan HaNavi, how difficult it is for us to say, you know something? You're right. I'm wrong. I need to do something good. What an important lesson. When we get that feeling, somebody comes and starts talking to us, and the fact that pushback begins to remember these tzaddikim, these angels of human beings, Miriam and Aaron, how they had a hard time with it. And even David HaMelech, the paradigm, the semel, even he, it was only because of a great picture drawn by Nasan HaNavi. Big person can learn from them and admit and correct themselves and ultimately do the Ratzon Hashem. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great Shabbos.